Hello everyone, we're going back in time to the Stone Age tonight, when clothes were created from whatever you didn't starve to death attempting to capture, among other things. Please take a moment to like and subscribe to the video before you settle in, but only if you truly like what I do here. Into a world where everything is chilly, hungry, flaming, or sharp. Occasionally, all at once. You've made it through the night. Seldom. And only because, while you were snoring like a sinus-addled mammoth, nothing hungry happened to stumble into your cave. The good news? You're still here. The bad news? The Stone Age is where you are. You have a rock of a bed. Not the kind of rock that feels like a hard mattress. A real slab of nature that hasn't made any effort to make room for your spine. If you're lucky, a layer of fur, likely from some poor animal you didn't murder but are now dressed like you did, stands between you and hypothermia. The odor of regret is still there. When you attempt to sit up, your joints crack loud enough to startle a saber-toothed tiger, or at least, make the person crouching next to you sharpening a bone knife and appearing to be quite bored with your life, grunt in disapproval. It's freezing outside. Winter walk cold is not appealing. My breath is visible, and perhaps a piece of my spirit is chilly as well. No fire is present, only the burning remnants of what may have been warmth, now reduced to ash, smoke, and embarrassment. The sun isn't even up yet outside, most likely because it doesn't want to. The tribe is already awake, and moving around in this manner is commonplace. It is very reasonable to get up before the sun to gather rocks and avoid dying. Conversely, you appear to have been placed into a survival competition as a bewildered poet. To be honest, neither you nor anyone else knows what you're expected to do. However, they are more adept at acting. You elongate. A bad concept. You're experiencing pain in unexpected locations. Your hips formally protest, your back trembles, and your shoulders snap. No coffee, no soft talk, no brunch, waiting. Just the harsh realization that you might be left behind, or worse, devoured after you die, for convenience, if you don't start doing something helpful right away. That's how your morning gets started. You're starving. I could eat without hunger too. This type of hunger causes your stomach to start talking to itself, and none of the discussions are pleasant. You scan the area, hoping to see a sad piece of dried meat or perhaps a handful of berries. Nothing is present. Breakfast was not a daily routine in the Stone Age. It is speculative, hopeful, and a silent plea to an indifferent sky deity who might or might not be a big rock with a face etched into it during a fever dream. You have to work for what you consume. Digging, scraping, scavenging, or running after something faster than you and hope it's less intelligent are examples of this. It's not, spoiler alert. Either it has thorns or it has legs, and in both situations it turns them against you. You see a wiry man chewing on a root that appears to be something you wouldn't even touch. He extends a portion to you. It fills your mouth, and more significantly, it doesn't actively try to kill you. It tastes like wet wood that lost a bet. An uncommon victory. Another person displays a dead bird as if it were gold. Mostly feathers and nerves, it's around the size of your hand. Before you realize they're keeping the entire thing, they begin plucking it with the efficiency of someone who has done this a lot. It seems that catching food entitles you to consume it. What an idea! You think of foraging. How difficult, after all, could it be to identify anything edible? Very, it turns out. Each fruit appears aggressively bland or curiously brilliant. Something that somewhat resembles a plum is pluckable. Before you can taste it, a woman slaps it from your hand. She simply gives you a look that says, "I've seen people drop dead faster than that," without saying anything. Therefore, you pretend that chewing on a piece of old root is sufficient. It's not. You can't trick your stomach. It starts plotting your treachery. You're on a fast. If you're not careful, forever. You wish to be useful. That's adorable. The tribe is already occupied. A flint blade is being sharpened by someone. Sinew is being woven by someone else into what may be a trap, a net, or just a clever method to make you feel incompetent. You pick up a rock. You gaze at it. It returns the stare. You're bonding with a rock. Congratulations. Here, tools are not ornaments. Anybody still has teeth because of them. They dig, smash, scrape, hack, and sometimes grow accustomed to conflict. You're about as handy as a damp leaf unless you've spent years working out which stones split into blades and which ones merely break your thumb. You attempt to imitate what other people are doing. A man uses 3 strokes to create a razor-sharp edge after slamming 2 stones together. You make the same attempt. A fragment of rock flings straight into your face as it cracks unevenly. Now you're bleeding. You've managed to replicate the experience of early surgery, though. A woman is using strips of hide to make cord. She accomplishes it as efficiently as if she had been doing it since she was a baby. You make the same effort. The hide somehow links your fingers together, slips and coils. You've created handcuffs from the Stone Age. That's something? Nobody provides an explanation. They are not required to. Tools are considered to be as necessary as breathing. When you're not good at something, it's expected, clear, and quite apparent. How about you? You're not very good at it. You sit down with your 2 rocks, try a fresh tactic, and stare until you get an idea. It doesn't. Another stone fragment lands squarely in your lap. You act like it was deliberate. Nobody purchases it. Someone eventually feels sorry for you and gives you a scraper that isn't quite finished. Not out of sympathy, but because everyone is slowed down by seeing you fail. After giving an appreciative nod, you hold it incorrectly. They return to their job after shaking their head. The temperature is dropping once more, which, given that you didn't believe that colder was still a possibility, is impressive. Your feet are beginning to feel like someone else's problem. Your nose has ceased providing temperature updates, and your fingers are tight. It is time to start a fire, you decide. How hard can it be after all? It's been done for you. In illustrations as well as dreams. First step. Collect dry wood. Dry wood is not found. It's all wet, obstinate, and covered in something that might or might not be living. You choose the bundle that seems the least suspicious and cross your fingers. Step 2. Friction. You rub sticks together. Nothing takes place. You massage more vigorously. Nothing has changed. You eventually produce heat, smoke, and more smoke. It's only enough to give you false hope and burn your eyes. Then the wind arrives and blows everything away, making fun of your hard work. You continue. By this point, your arms hurt, your hands are blistered, and your confidence has stealthily left the camp without bidding farewell. You look over. A fire has already been started by one of the elders. Not a ceremony, not a drama. A little flawless flame that seemed to have been born amid a heap of parched moss. You turn to face your pile. It appears to have been cursed. After a while, someone takes notice. They approach, stealthily grab your kindling, reorganize it like a bored deity, and use a flint edge to strike 2 rocks together. Sparks, smoke, fire. Completed. Without saying a word, they give it to you and go before you can express gratitude or share your black magic with me. You gaze at the fire that is currently raging in your pile. You act as though you came up with it. Nobody takes you seriously. Everything revolves around fire. Cooked food, safety, warmth, light, and the only thing keeping predators from dragging you off into the night. It's not simple, though. It wasn't. Every fire is a conflict, and you just suffered 5 consecutive losses. You're thirsty, deep, dry, thirsty like sandpaper in your mouth. The type of thirst that makes you want to chew bark or lick moss in order to feel anything moist. Fortunately, a creek is close by. You stagger like a man under a spell in its direction. At last, something simple. You scoop up a magnificent handful of glistening water while kneeling and cupping your palms. You consume alcohol. Then you hesitate. It tasted like water, not a taste, a message. Something mechanical and strangely menacing was whispered. Your stomach responds a few seconds later with a gurgling that sounds like it's complaining. The thing is this. Water was unclean and unfiltered during the Stone Age. The snow isn't piped from a mountain spring with love. It's a crazy soup for everyone. It is used by animals to drink. It is used for bathing. Things can occasionally perish in it. After something dies in it, people occasionally drink it. No quality control is in place. Only danger exists. You search for any indication that this water is safe. Nobody else is drinking. That could be a hint. Over a fire, one of the elders is boiling something. A young youngster passes by and gives you a water gourd that has been hollowed out. It still appears safer than whatever just landed in your lower intestine, and it's warm and has a slight dirty scent. But there's nothing else to do. You live in a culture that hasn't developed filtration, plumbing, or even reliable guidance on which puddles won't ruin your week. Water is there, and thirst never goes away. It's simply, inconveniently, militarized. You hear a half-whispered story about a man who didn't make it to dawn after drinking from the wrong bend in the river. You slowly nod in an attempt to memorize the story, while simultaneously acting as though you didn't just do the same thing. It's time to wait now. Are you going to spend the next 12 hours regretting every choice your tongue made, or will you drink some water and feel better? You've made the decision to go hunting, audacious, courageous, doomed. A spear is presented to you. It smells like the last object it was rammed into, is weighty and is uneven. Something with tusks, most likely. If groceries aggressively try to impale you, the others quietly inspect their equipment as if they were simply heading out to get groceries. You go into the woods after the group. There is silence in the air. Too silent. You think this is good. It isn't. The fact that there is no sound indicates that all of the animals within a mile are aware of your presence and have made the decision not to be. Someone eventually notices something, an untamed boar. It's enormous. It appears to enjoy bench-pressing logs. You lift your spear. Your hand is trembling. You're even less confident. The boar raises his head. You become motionless. The boar doesn't. It gets charged. You sprint. That's all. That's your plan. You eat dirt, trip over a root, and run through the trees. It's not a metaphor. Real dirt. It has the same uplifting flavor as your performance. The actual hunters are moving precisely behind you. Another flanks from the side while one darts to the left. Spears soar. The boar falls. The tribe applauds. You're still on the ground, reconsidering who you are. The cadaver is dragged back to the camp. It requires a lot of grunting and 4 people. Trying to appear helpful, you limp after them. You didn't. They exercised their hands and used stone knives to butcher the animal back at the fire. You are given a raw meat strip. You chew it as though attempting to comprehend the mechanism of flavor. It's strangely emotional, chewy, and a little heated. It was meant to be your time, your valiant discovery. However, hunting in the Stone Age isn't really a movie. It's draining, it's risky. You also don't get the animal most of the time. You are taken by the animal. Today, you have gained essential knowledge. The top predator is not you. You are the one who obstructs the hunting team and nearly dies from a pig's rage. You choose to try something safer after nearly being crushed to death by an enormous pork rocket. Plants. How challenging might foraging be? You have observed leaves. You have even had a hand on a mushroom. In essence, you are a herbalist with a tiny, woven purse and unending hope you set off. Two things that have previously resulted in fatalities. You've discovered something promising in a matter of minutes. A bush with berries, small, glossy, and brightly colored. The berries are either a biological warning siren or an indication that the plant is being fed. You pick one up. A woman nearby swats your hand away as if to save your life just as you're about to put it in your mouth, which she is, to be fair. Nobody provides an explanation. They are not required to. You should be aware of what is edible and what is lethal, and the tribe gains one more narrative if you don't. You go on, pull out some tubers, make an effort to project confidence, remembering that fungi in this universe are less side dishes and more hallucinogenic. Before dying beneath a fern, you even sniff a mushroom with academic curiosity before discarding it. Something that resembles a withered brown carrot is shown to you by a man. He gives a nod. You return the nod as though you were acquainted with this plant. You take a bite out of it. It tastes like regret and dirt, but at least you're still alive, so that counts as success. In actuality, the true guardians of survival are plants. They are not runners. They never bite. They simply wait for you to make a mistake while they sit there in silence. It's a race between vomiting and your nervous system going down if you take one wrong turn. Even the edible ones are effective. Certain seeds will kill you if you don't roast them first, while other roots require boiling, and leaves require drying. There are just symptoms, no shortcuts. When you get back to camp, you have a few edible blossoms, 2 somewhat safe tubers, and a newfound appreciation for herbal expertise that you do not have at all. Let's discuss what you're wearing, or more accurately, what has been wrapped around you like a badly prepared meatloaf. Your clothing is made of animal hides that were cleaned with a rock, dried over smoke, and sewn together using a method that can only be characterized as practical but slightly offensive. It is not appropriate. It has no ability to breathe. It smells like something that may still be alive, or was alive not long ago. Your arms are supposed to come out of the openings. There are no sleeves. The clothing itself is loose in some places and stiff in others, and it was typically created by someone whose sole fashion objective was to live today. You try to modify it by pulling at the edges, a bad concept. In response, the dry sinew seams pierce your skin more deeply. You're chafing now. Well done. Clothes had adverse impacts in the Stone Age. A woman nearby is chewing a fresh hide to soften it. Chewing it, indeed. This is seen as typical. For a moment you ponder how desperate someone must have been to find out that teeth could be used as a tailoring tool. You attempt to appear respectable. It's challenging. When you move, your fur tunic flaps strangely. Your inner and outer thighs are now fighting over territory, and your boots are 2 mismatched shreds bound together with strips of gut. The temperature comes next. Your hide garment somehow manages to be both too warm and too cold. Your limbs hang loosely in the wind like offerings to the frost gods, but the fur traps heat around your body, causing you to perspire. Don't even inquire about the rain. The hides get soaked. Wet hides gain weight. All of a sudden you're moving around with a soggy animal sponge that drips down your back and gradually comes back to life. The remainder of the clan, meanwhile, appears completely comfortable in their handcrafted clothing. They move with their clothing, like it resents being worn by someone this inept. Yours moves against you. You believe you are liked by the tribe. That's very cute. You've spent 1 or 2 days here. You're doing your best, which in Stone Age terms still places you just above animal bait and below dead weight, and you haven't yet put anyone in danger. Of course, no one says it aloud. That would require work. However, the indications are present. They sit a little closer to one another around the fire, giving you a wide 4-foot buffer zone. It's as if you're contagious, which may be true, given that you drank from the incorrect stream. Here, social status is determined by a single, straightforward criteria. Utility. Are you able to hunt? Are you able to collect? When insects creep up your leg, can't you scream? No, congrats. You are not a member of the inner circle. You are more of a transient and highly flammable guest. You make an effort to help. You provide a path. It's not the right path. You attempt to assist Tanner in hiding. A hole is punched through it. A bundle of sticks is handed to you, and someone makes an ambiguous motion toward the fire. You hold it as though you're going to create a new kind of performance art. They stop requesting your assistance. One day a kid hands you a jagged rock. You think it's a present? It's not. It's a test. By holding the blade upside down and letting the blood run onto your own foot, you fail it. Nobody responds. The worst part is that nobody makes fun of you. They simply go on, similar to nature, similar to the weather. It's not worth getting upset about you. Still, someone grunts toward you and you hear it. You sense the tone in your bones, even though you don't understand it. Not dangerous, unfriendly, merely observant. Just like when someone remarks on a wood that isn't burning evenly, the log is you. You begin to question whether the wolves would be a more understanding audience. There's no flame, lantern, or cozy warmth from a bulb on the bedside table. Like a guillotine, the sun disappears beyond the horizon, and the world goes dark in an instant. Not gloomy, not comfortable, dark. The flickering circle of light created by the fire crackling somehow makes everything just barely visible, adding to the horror. In the distant trees rustle. There's a howl. It's either a wolf or a wolf-eating creature. In any case, it is aware of your whereabouts. It has been anticipating your sleep. As you get closer to the flames, you scoop. Nobody comes along with you. The majority of the tribe is already huddled in a heap of hides, creating a cozy mass of body heat and trust. You're not welcome. It was you who scared off a buck with your sneeze during the hunting group. The cave's chilly side is revealed to you. It's difficult to fall asleep. Outside the heat of the fire, every sound seems to have a purpose. A twig breaks, you take a seat. A branch makes a creaking sound. Your breathing stops. Something behind the rock wall snorts or perhaps exhales. You reconcile with your deities. You assume they'll understand even though you don't know their names. Even the stars appear to be evaluating you. Yes, it is beautiful, but it is pointless. They won't frighten away anything that has recently moved close to the cave entrance and you can't wear or consume them. You shut your eyes. You practically instantly open them again. Your mind tells you that you are laying on a slab of uneven ground covered in a damp fur coat, and that there are people around you who might or might not notice if you are carried away in the middle of the night. The problem is this: it won't be malicious if something does consume you. It will be inefficient. You move slowly, you're not strong, and you most likely smell like worry based on the fact that you didn't cook that root sooner. Though it shouldn't be possible, the Stone Age takes pleasure in experiencing new kinds of pain. You wake up stiff, pained, and strangely colder than when you went to sleep. Your fur wrap, which was only providing emotional support, has moved during the night. Your arm has a fresh bite, and your ankle feels like it lost a battle with a boulder. It might be a bug, it might be a rodent. You're just happy that something found you useful, really. The tribe is already awake outside the cave. Once more, you have no idea when they go to sleep. Perhaps they don't. Perhaps, like everything else in their lives, they simply fight fatigue into surrender. Hoping for something warm, you limp over to the fire pit. It doesn't exist, it's freezing in the ashes. Sometime during the night, the fire was extinguished. Apparently, it was a collective decision without consulting you or your now-dead fingers, which are sufficiently numb to be considered ornamental. You try to get back into the group. A stick is handed to you. No guidelines, no justification. It's for prodding things, you suppose. A task, perhaps. Self-defense, perhaps. They might simply be trying to see what you'll do with it. Of course you fail. Every motion is painful, your muscles hurt, because you're using them for tasks they weren't made for, specifically survival. You're carrying too little, too incorrectly, and your shoulders scream. It feels like gravel has been poured into your knees. Your pride, back there, next to the heap of raw tubers you stumbled over yesterday. The others have already begun to organize. Someone is using bones to reinforce the shelter wall. Something is being gutted by another with frightful ease. You stumble over a child's toy, literally just a little rock with a face on it, while attempting to assist once more. The child looks at you as if you've offended his forefathers. Most likely, you have. Nobody gives you instructions. Here, that isn't how it operates. Instead of asking dumb questions like, is this sharp thing supposed to be covered in blood already? You're supposed to know, and if you don't, you're supposed to figure it out. You initially believe it is raining. It's not. Rain is beginning to fall. Even worse, you now know that the whole downpour is on its way. You're also not prepared. Nobody is ever prepared. As if the sky had just delivered a crude joke, even the residents who have lived here their entire lives look up and scowl. You walk slowly to the shelter's edge. Shelter is a broad term that includes the belief that trees are waterproof and certain branches bound together with gut strings. They're not, spoiler alert. The wind increases. Like a wet napkin, it slashes through your hide garments. Your boots, which are merely animal hide pieces fastened to your feet, start to soak through right away. You squeeze your toes. You act as though you're unaware. The rain really starts. Drops of cold fat that seem more like punishment than water. All of a sudden, everything is slippery. The flames flicker. The walls make a groaning noise. The air is filled with the fragrance of damp fur, which is like an unwelcome apology. You seek solace by ducking into the cave. It's a little better, just a little. The floor is now dirt, and there are 3 leaks in the roof. You see a centipede confidently move across the space where you sleep. It appears better equipped to handle this life than you are. Already the others are adapting. Inside, someone is moving firewood, and next to the smoke, someone else is hanging hides to dry. You knock over a pile of tools in an attempt to assist. There's a loud clang. Likewise the stairs. Now you're in the way and wet. A half-dry pelt is later thrown to you to wear. You try not to appear very appreciative as you drape it over yourself like a drenched emperor. It is beneficial. A little, but not much. The storm howls outside as if it has a particular grudge against your comfort as you sit down and drips softly into a puddle. The first sign is a cough. Nothing noteworthy. A minor splinter in the throat. You make an effort to ignore it. By mid-morning, your nose has chosen to kill itself and you're wheezing like a dying goat. You have tears in your eyes. It feels warm against your skin. Not really warm. Warm infection. You don't tell anyone about this because nobody will take any action. The Stone Age's medical care period is now formally upon you. Well done. There are no physicians, clinics, or herbs that someone named Fern has put neatly on a wooden shelf. Rather, after glancing at you, an elder hands you a bundle of crushed leaves and moans. You chew them. It has the flavor of old perspiration marinated in rotting spinach. As though it's helpful, you give a somber nod. It's not. Your fever gets worse. A steam treatment is recommended. This entails pouring water over heated rocks while sitting in a pit adjacent to them. You sweat, cough, and think of dying. A sauna created by someone who has only ever heard about saunas through hallucinations is comparable to this. Someone eventually rubs your chest with a concoction of mud, herbs, and possibly animal fat, apparently for attracting the spirits. You don't pose inquiries. You're too preoccupied with chills. Anguish? No pain alleviation is available. The tribe's unofficial healer, a woman with precisely 3 teeth and a constant frown, gives you a stick to bite on and a knowing glance. In a language that could simply be irritated breathing, she murmurs something. Time, luck, or avoiding death before it passes seem to be the cures for everything. You make an effort to sleep. You get weird dreams. In one, you are being pursued by a bison-sized squirrel. Your spear is speaking in another. A puddle of your own perspiration and broken leaves surrounds you as you wake up, gasping. You're not better at the end of the day. You're not worse, though. This implies that you might live in Stone Age terms, or perhaps you're just starting phase 2, bone ache. You bumped into someone today by mistake. Not difficult. Just a minor bump on your shoulder as you head to the fire. They regarded you as though you had just issued a challenge to a duel. Your apologies was a stutter. They didn't respond. They just squared their shoulders, got to their feet, and glared at you until your soul departed through your socks. It turns out that candid communication and attentive listening were not the foundations of dispute resolution in the Stone Age. This is more of a culture of let's see who survives this disagreement. The idea of de-escalation does not exist. Nobody is employing a soothing voice or a polite reminder that we are all on the same team to ease the tension. Rather, someone in the vicinity casually sharpens a stick. It's a general lifestyle decision, not because of your conflict. Still, though, it's an obvious message. Don't try too hard. Stares, silence, or unexpected acts of intensely intimate violence are used to settle disputes. There are alternatives if it gets out of hand. An altercation, a ritual of insults, or just exile into the woods where the leopards are constantly recruiting. You offer a smoked fish in an attempt to diffuse the situation. It's not approved. You've insulted someone's grandmother who created that recipe 8 generations ago because the fish is overcooked, not because of the gesture. Finally, a tribal elder breaks a little stick in half and mutters something. This is a metaphor. The man you bumped gives a grunt and turns to leave, but you're not sure why. You're not worth killing, apparently. Still, later you get a pat on the back from someone who wants to check how many ribs you still have, or to reassure you. You don't know. You now know that peacekeeping in the Stone Age required a great deal of expertise. A mistaken look, an unequal portion of meat, or excessive breathing while you're asleep can have unavoidable consequences. You can't agree or disagree. You can either agree or dig a hole. Nowadays, you would write a 1-star review. You leave the tribe here, or they abandon you. You succeeded then? In a way? It may be a stretch, but you've survived an entire Stone Age day. Yes, you are living, but not really thriving. Your dignity is in ruins, your stomach hasn't forgiven you, your clothes are wet, and every muscle in your body has officially complained. However, in this case, success is defined as the fact that you are still alive. You have not been banished by the tribe. It might have been an oversight, or perhaps they have decided in private that you are too amusing to part with just yet. After all, the group spent 6 minutes together watching you try to scale that tree in search of berries, which are actually wasps. You sit by the fire as night falls once more. It's not quite as near as it was yesterday. You're starting to pick up on this world's rhythm, the peaceful mornings, the intense heat, and the never-ending necessity to earn respect, food, and shelter with untrained hands. You haven't received any explanations. They never do. This is not an instruction-based universe. It's an observational, imitative, and failure-based world until you learn what survival won't teach you. A strip of roasted beef is handed to you by someone. You give a grateful nod. It's salty, rough, and slightly furry. As if it were your final meal, you chew it. Perhaps it is. You still have no place here. Not at all. Your mind is constantly attempting to use reasoning from a different era when socks and microwaves were commonplace. But it's beginning to adjust, painfully and slowly. You now understand that roots are trying to harm you. Water, is rarely a gift, and fire doesn't make itself. The tribe uses their unique language, which is more gesture and expression than words, to communicate in a low voice. You nod even though you don't hear it. It looks courteous. Wrapped in furs that smell like every animal in the forest has a tug-of-war with them, you settle down on your little patch of frozen earth. Your body aches. You have lost your dignity. However, nothing is hurting you right now. That's as nice as it gets in the Stone Age. You wouldn't survive for a day. In a technical sense, you did. However, we shouldn't risk another one. There was stiffness and stillness at first. Two items that were never as innocuous as they appeared in Japan during the Edo period. A young daimyo from western Japan named Lord Asano Naganori of Akko had been called to the shogun's castle in Edo to carry out a sensitive task, accept and host representatives from the Kyoto emperor. This was no easy task. The court required accuracy. It was all about protocol. A high-ranking court official, master of ceremonies and unofficially notorious for accepting bribes, Kira Yoshinaka, was also keeping watch over the festivities. But those games were not Lord Asano's style. He was descended from proud samurai. Honor wasn't a negotiating point. His face was incapable of feigning a smile, which may have been detrimental to him. Kira took notice. Kira was angry about it. Kira started harassing Asano with taunts, subtle jabs, scathing corrections, and small-time humiliations in the days that followed. Whispers reverberated through Edo Castle's courtly hallways. Kira had made Asano wait outside of the rooms he was meant to host, dubbed him a rural bumpkin, and made fun of his manners. The strain, like pressure under varnished wood, grew cruelly and silently. And then it broke on the 21st day of the 3rd month of 1701. Asano pulled out his short sword and charged Kira in an Edo Castle passage. The elder man's shoulder and cheek were lightly cut by his sword, not a kill, but an insult. But to pull a gun in the castle of the shogun? Whatever the provocation, that could not be forgiven. Kira made it through. Asano was taken into custody right away. The shogunate rendered a decision in a few hours. No inquiry, no second chances. By sundown, Lord Asano was to perform ceremonial suicide, or seppuku. His family was dishonored, his properties were seized, his retainers were expelled, and, most cruelly, Kira went unpunished and triumphant. However, it was not the end of the story. Oishi Kuranosuke was one of Asano's Ronin, or now masterless samurai. And as the world went on, Oishi started to calmly and silently make plans. There was more to this than retaliation. It has to do with something older and more profound, a test of the warrior's way, or Bushido, and it was only getting started. Lord Asano's passing ought to have signaled the end. They eliminated his house. His men broke up. It had been made plain by the shogun. No vendetta would exist. Kira stayed in his estate, where she was legally protected. Justice had been done, quickly and icily. The samurai's code, however, revealed a different picture outside the shogun's palace. Asano's chief retainer, Oishi Kuranosuke, did not cry. He didn't yell. He obeyed the order, lowered his head, and scattered the Akko samurai. On the outside, he gave in. He waited inwardly. The Ronin dispersed. A few went back to their families. Trades were taken up by others, beggars, monks, and merchants. The world assumed that they had moved on and that their master had perished along with them. A strategy, however, was coiling tighter beneath the surface. Oishi was aware of the shogunate's observation. Taking revenge was illegal, particularly when directed toward a guy who still had status and favor, like Kira. Arrest would result from any indication of plotting, or worse, being put to death before the act was completed, Oishi so played the idiot. He relocated to Kyoto, where he engaged in open drinking, public gambling, and courtesan relationships. He presented the image of a man shattered by shame for more than a year. Unkempt, inebriated, and dishonored. The ideal representation of failure. The reverse was being done by his fellow Ronin. They communicated in private letters and in the shadowy recesses of tea cafes and temples. They observed Kira's motions. They took measurements of his Edo mansion's layout. They became familiar with the routines of the guards, the rhythms of the gates, and the tempo of the home. For his part, Kira calmed down. He had well-placed pals and a well-healing scar. His adversaries had disappeared into thin air. What more were they able to do? They lacked a name, a master, and authority. That's just what Oishi intended him to believe. Because there was a mind sharper than any blade behind the slurred words and sake-stained clothes. He was not merely plotting a murder, he was putting together a statement, a message that would resonate throughout Japan, one that would demonstrate to the world that Bushido, the real Bushido, was still alive. Not quite yet. And when the moment was right, that silence would eventually break in the icy depths of winter. In late 1702, when snow started to fall over Edo, 47 Ronin had already decided, don't wait any longer, stop observing. The moment had arrived for revenge. Oishi Kuranosuke organized his dispersed brothers into a military unit. To get to Edo, some people traveled for days. Some had never really gone. One by one, however, they came together again as samurai, not as nomadic men, nor for compensation, nor to regain honor, but out of obligation, the type that survives death. It was an exact strategy. Every man played a part. It wasn't a fight. Every little element was important because it was a show. They quickly and silently constructed new weaponry. They constructed winter armor that was heavy enough to fend off a blow, yet light enough to climb walls. To escape suspicion if someone asked why a group of men were marching through the city at night, they even constructed a fictitious fire department, complete with uniforms. Kira's home was a stronghold, tall walls, plenty of guards, several gates. However, it had been researched for more than a year. The layout was committed to memory. The routines are predictable. The servants are unconcerned. Most had relaxed. Why wouldn't they? The Ronin had vanished. Their leader was intoxicated. Buried was their cause. Oishi ensured the safety of his own family. He sent his wife and their younger children away from the incoming blood after divorcing her. He was aware of the price. He was aware that it might fail. And he was aware that they would all receive death sentences, even if it did. However, Bushido's approach left no room for individual safety. They relocated on January 30th, 1703, the 14th night of the 12th month, according to the Western calendar. Edo was covered with snow which muffled footsteps and made noise. It was an ideal ally. The Ronin divided into two teams at 2 in the morning. Attacks would be made on the front and back gates, respectively. When both sides were in position, a signal would be delivered. It was an easy mission. Take control of the house, take Kira's life, and try not to upset the city too much. No innocence. No needless blood. Just justice. More than a year had passed for some. Others had pretended to forget during the entire year. It was no longer necessary to forget now that the darkness was watching and swords were drawn. Justice would not wait much longer. Silence fell before the attack started. Don't yell. No wild charges. Just calculated aggression under the pale winter moon, well coordinated. Before the guards even realized they were besieged, Oishi's front team used a battering ram to break through the main gate and burst through the massive doors. The back team, meanwhile, climbed the walls and silently killed guards with the practiced effectiveness of men who had practiced this night 100 times. Kira's family went into a frenzy. Guards scurried around, half-dressed, many of them intoxicated or dozing off. The servants let out a yell. It was too late to light lanterns. The Ronin moved like wolves, using quick, accurate blows to dispatch opponents. They weren't mindless killers. Only Kira was their objective, they yelled. Those who did not fight were spared. Chikara, Oishi's 16-year-old eldest son, fought with his father. Despite Bushido's rhetoric, this was not a theoretical ideal. Swords slipping on icy tiles, steel, smoke in the lungs, and blood. With the cost etched into the flesh, it was unwavering loyalty. The man had disappeared while the Ronin searched the residence for Kira. They searched every room and every obscure nook. They asked servants questions. At last, they discovered a hidden courtyard. A man in simple robes was quivering in a shed behind the garden, his face pale and his body shivering beneath a heap of straw and charcoal. Kira was the one. He wouldn't give his name. He remained silent. However, he still possessed the facial scar that Lord Asano had caused over 2 years prior. Oishi gave him the opportunity to pass away honorably. Like a samurai, he was presented with a dagger, seppuku. Kira, however, was unable to. He just froze, staring. When the moment came, the guy who had wiped off a clan without using a weapon was unable to accept responsibility. Oishi made a single bow. Then he hit. Kira Yoshinaka passed away like a coward rather than a lord. The Ronin quietly marched through Edo's snow-covered streets while wearing full armor after wrapping his head in cloth. They took the trophy to Lord Asano's grave at Sengaku-ji Temple. They prayed there after cleaning the head and placing it in front of his grave. They had fully exacted their wrath. They were doomed. Edo woke up in the morning to the unthinkable. Word got around like wildfire. 47 Ronin killed Kira Yoshinaka in the center of the city. Instead of running away or hiding, they marched in column to the temple where their lord was interred. They didn't try to get away, they just got down on their knees, held up the severed head, and waited. Normally bustling with merchants and samurai noise, the city became oddly silent. They were referred to as heroes by some. They were referred to as criminals by some. However, no one referred to them as cowards. Now the authorities were stuck. The legislation was unambiguous. Killings for revenge were forbidden. Justice was not above samurai, regardless of how eloquent their cause may be. However, criminals were not visible to the public. They saw men who had been the epitome of Bushido. They had complied with the deeper, more ancient law of loyalty rather than the shogun's laws. For weeks the shogunate deliberated. There was more to this than crime and punishment. It was about samurai culture's essence. More vendettas would be encouraged if the Ronin were spared. The masses might rebel in spirit if they were punished. The 47 men, meanwhile, were still at Sengaku-ji. They didn't fight back. They didn't plead. As they tended to Lord Asano's grave and awaited their destiny, they sat in silent contemplation. The mastermind behind it all, Oishi, remained silent. By his actions, he had already stated everything. Finally, a decision was made. The Ronin would be permitted to pass away with honor. Instead of being put to death for their crimes, they would be told to perform ceremonial suicide, or seppuku, like the samurai they still claimed to be. On the morning of February 4th, 1703, a dagger was given to each man. They clothed in white robes, the color of purity and death. They bowed to Lord Asano's memory, to the officials, and to one another. Then, under the direction of a second who would perform the rite with a clean decapitation, they began to cut into themselves one by one. Even Chikara, Oishi's teenage son, accepted the blade without hesitation. Not a single one faltered. They passed away in mythology rather than shame. Their bodies were buried beside their master at Sengakuji. The tombs are still there, 47 stones in tidy rows draped with incense and offerings from pilgrims who still murmur their names, because they had accomplished what life was unable to. They were now everlasting. The narrative of the 47 Ronin didn't disappear. It reverberated first in the streets of Edo, then in the corridors of authority, and ultimately in the very heart of Japan. Samurai had been expected to murder without hesitation and die without protest for ages, serving as both warriors and servants. However, the 47 Ronin made it difficult to distinguish. Yes, they were criminals, but they were also exemplary of loyalty. Despite breaking the law, they adhered strictly to Bushido's philosophy. Although they defied the shogun, they paid more respect to their lord in death than most people did in life. Everyone was captivated by the paradox. Was Bushido about submitting to one's master or the state? Did the warrior's will or the law of man define justice? Officials from the Tokugawa tried to minimize the event. They were afraid of imitators. They were afraid of anarchy. However, it was too late. The tale had spread, becoming uncontrollable and untamed. Within weeks, kabuki plays, thinly veiled retellings of the same story with alternate names for the characters, were being performed. They were prohibited by the government. In any case, new plays appeared. Woodblock prints of the Ronin in mid-attack, kneeling in seppuku, or solemnly walking with Kira's head, were purchased. Conflict arose even among those who adhered to absolute obedience, because even though the Ronin had broken the law, they had done it with grace and self-control. There was no running, no gloating, no looting. They had plotted, waited, hit, and then given up. People perceived something ancient and noble in that restraint. Oishi Kuronosuke became the quintessential retainer, calm, astute, and death-defying. Chikara, his kid, became the epitome of childish devotion. The younger Ronin were seen as honorable individuals who gave up destinies they were never able to experience. Furthermore, the plot changed rather than simply surviving. It ultimately rose to national legend status and was praised in plays, books, and eventually movies. Whether pride, grief, or a guide to bravery, the story had something to offer every generation. Loyalty is frequently a word on paper in this world, but the Ronin had written theirs in snow and blood. The people had determined that these guys were not traitors, regardless of the shogunate's approval. The last real samurai were they. Sengakuji Temple's 47 graves evolved into more than just monuments. They turned into a shrine to the very essence of samurai honor, as well as to the individuals who were interred there. Pilgrims from all around Japan arrived, bowed low, lit incense, and prayed in hushed tones rather than to gods. The temple itself turned into a silent conundrum. Despite the bustle and trade of the city, Sengakuji was quiet. The grounds were cared for solemnly by monks. Every winter, snow covered the headstones, just as it had on the night Kira passed away. Visitors assemble annually to honor the act on the anniversary of the attack, which falls on December 14th according to the lunar calendar. The air is heavy with incense and lanterns flicker. Some show up in full samurai regalia, while others attend in silence and leave letters of appreciation, flowers, or money. The web page attracted visitors even if they did not believe in retribution, because you couldn't overlook the discipline and the sacrifice regardless of your views on ethics or the law. The silence of 47 men who sacrificed their futures for a concept that predated the shogunate. The burials were revered for many generations. They took schoolchildren there to teach them the value of loyalty. Before leaving for battle, soldiers came to visit. In an attempt to understand the silent power of what had transpired, writers, poets, and philosophers scrawled lines in their notebooks. The myth persisted even as the outer world changed, Japan evolving from a feudal land to a modern state, Edo becoming Tokyo. Rather, it expanded. The story persisted even after the code of Bushido was incorporated into nationalism, and samurai were outlawed during the Meiji Restoration. Yes, it was reused, but it was never forgotten. Movies were produced. Plays were brought back to life. Languages that the Ronin had never heard were used to translate books. Alongside skyscrapers and vending machines, Sengaku-ji is now frequented by tourists. Like everyone else, they take selfies. Nevertheless, most people go silent when they approach Oishi Kuranosuke's stone. There is something precise, something still about it. This man, who knew he would die for it, waited a year to deliver a single blow. A guy who put devotion ahead of safety is buried here, and the consequences of that decision are still felt today in this peaceful area of Tokyo. The snow hasn't melted in 3 millennia. The tale of the 47 Ronin slipped from history into legend throughout the ages, and then from legend into entertainment. Under the Tokugawa ruler, what had started out as a genuine act of retaliation was now, very literally, theatre. Chushingura, a kabuki and bunraku drama that changed names and dramatized events while maintaining the story's essence, was the story's immortalized form by the middle of the 18th century. Justice postponed but not denied, loyalty and sacrifice. Viewers cried, applauded, and kept coming back to see it. They turned into archetypes. The stoic genius, Oishi; Kira, the haughty antagonist; Chikara, the young nobleman. These parts were specialized by stage players who passed the performances along like relics from one generation to the next. Oishi was played for decades by certain families. The meaning never changed, but the scripts did. The 47 Ronin gained international recognition in the 19th century as Japan opened to the West. The story was translated by scholars. Its moral weight was commended by admirers. Victorian Europe loved stories like this, tragic, honorable, and orderly. Of course, Hollywood has its own opinions. Movies were produced, some reverent, some, well, not so much. With witches, demons, and a protagonist who is partly English, the story was reinvented as a fantasy action film starring Keanu Reeves in 2013. In Japan, it exploded. Those who continued to use candles at Sengaku-ji did not attend CGI. They had another reason for coming: real, quiet, and respectful. However, it says volumes that such a picture was produced at all. Since everyone recognized the story, it had progressed to the point where it might be misrepresented. It was impossible to forget, even if it was warped. Echoes of the Ronin appear subtly in manga and anime. Tales of banished fighters, lone swordsmen on impossible quests, and motley crews of devoted followers opposing corrupt authority. Because the story is ageless at its foundation, the structure is recognizable. A gang of oath-bound men who must face death in order to maintain purpose in a morally decaying planet. Although katanas and lords are a thing of the past in modern Japan, the notion that devotion endures even when the system fails persists. It comes up in protest speeches, pop songs, boardrooms, and classrooms, as a whisper, not always directly. That true honor remains despite being uncomfortable, challenging, and even unlawful. And each time the 47 Ronin rises once more, the 47 Ronin are still there, 300 years later. Their names are inscribed on the Japanese psyche as well as on stone tablets at Sengaku-ji. They are more than just historical personalities. They are representations. The kind you indicate when all else seems hazy, when justice and the law are at odds. Sometimes life is worth more than loyalty. And that's the reason their narrative endures so long. It doesn't have a happy ending. They did indeed perish, all of them. However, they ignited a controversy that has never quite subsided. Were they criminals or heroes? Were they loyal in a good way or dangerously out of date? Did they demonstrate Bushido's incompatibility with law and order, or did they elevate it? The Tokugawa shogunate desired to put the discussion with them out of their minds. Instead, their deaths stoked a slow-burning fire beneath all the institutions that attempted to establish samurai identity. Professors at universities are still debating both viewpoints. According to others, the Ronin were a dying code of honorable murderers. Others claim that they embodied the finest of it, an unwavering moral compass in a society that is becoming more and more bureaucratic. What about the general public? In the second camp still, echoes of the Ronin can be found all across contemporary Japan. Corporate workers who, even at the expense of their own careers, refuse to turn on their bosses during a controversy. Soldiers who give their lives without complaining and serve in silence. Even manga heroes who are unarmed and just have moral convictions. They are not relics, the Ronin. They serve as points of reference. Additionally, their story feels oddly contemporary in a time where loyalty is uncommon and truth is optional. A memoir was never written by Oishi Kuronosuke. He left no ethical treatise in his wake. However, he left behind a question that was as sharp as a sword. What are you serving and how much are you prepared to spend on it? That question was answered by the 47 Ronin. Time, stillness, and ultimately their lives, not words or catchphrases. A dead guy was obeyed by them. In order to fulfill a promise, they broke the law. By doing this, they transcended the status of samurai. Every generation must gaze into them and ask itself, would I have followed? They turned into a mirror. Would I have been brave enough to stop? It was considered a sign of impending doom in ancient Egypt to hurt a cat. Not only social disgrace, but also legal penalties and occasionally mob justice. That was the seriousness of it. In the modern sense, cats were not pets. They were revered, untouchable, and sometimes more sincerely grieved than family members. Egyptians would shave their eyebrows in mourning when a family cat passed away. Ritual, not out of style. Cats were more than simply pets. They served as the divine's protectors. This respect had its origins in religion. The feline goddess of protection, music, fertility, and home was Bastet, who was Ra's daughter. She started off as a vicious and destructive lioness. However, she gradually became more like a cat, maintaining her strength while acquiring grace. Offerings, jewelry, perfumes, and, most importantly, cats were all over her temples, actual ones. They were thought to be incarnations of the goddess herself, living, breathing cats that roamed freely and were fed by priests. Large cat cemetery have been discovered by archaeologists close to Bastet's main temple in Bubastis. In tidy rows were mummified cats wrapped with the same care as human corpses. A few were interred wearing jewelry. Some were preserved using fragrances and resins. This was nothing new. It was a business. In order to serve in the afterlife, cats were occasionally ritually killed, consecrated, and reproduced for religious purposes. The symbolism was profound. Ra, the solar deity, was always at odds with snakes, which cats pursued. It was more than simply pest management when a cat killed a snake. Cosmic warfare was what it was. Cats patrolled granaries, lounged in sunlight, and had that unearthly, unreadable aspect. Lazy pet, the Egyptians saw that and didn't think. Divine mystery, they thought. Foreigners couldn't understand. Herodotus and other Greek historians were astonished and maybe a little amused by how easily Egyptian anger could be aroused by the mere mistreatment of a cat. The Persians reportedly used cats as living shields during one battle because they knew the Egyptians would be reluctant to attack. It could appear overbearing to the modern eye. The Egyptians, however, did not view animals as inferior to people. The gods were nearer to them. Cats stood at the nexus of beauty and the sacred in their grace and self-reliance. Not only animals, portals. The bull ruled in palaces rather than pastures on the island of Crete, which is encircled by the Aegean Sea's undulating azure. One of the first well-developed civilizations in Europe, the Minoans, were not merely bull admirers. They performed them in a ritual. Around them, they created myths. Like gods, they painted them on the walls. When you enter Knossos' magnificent palace, you'll see vibrant frescoes. Scenes brimming with action and rhythm include acrobats leaping over horns and leaping bulls. There was more to this than just sports. This was a holy sight. It was referred to as bull leaping, a ceremonial dance and a defiant display of respect and agility. Men and women participated in order to engage with the bull and build a connection between the divine and human realms, not to kill it. Because the bull was more than just an animal to the Minoans, the force was cosmic. Their mythology probably contained a great deal of symbolism. It was thought that the mythical Minotaur, a hybrid of a bull and a man, lived in a labyrinth beneath Knossos. Was it a myth? Perhaps. However, myths frequently reflect more profound realities. It's possible that the Minotaur evoked memories of ritual power and of people and animals combining in hallowed places. And the bull was linked to the sky. The crescent moon was reflected in its horns. Its thunderous boom, its massive, muscular body seemed too strong to be made of just flesh. The bull was a message at an era when people read the world through symbols, motion, strength, and fertility. Although the Minoans were not as murderous as later Greek cultures, sacrifices were probably an element of this veneration. Yes, some bulls were ceremoniously slain, but others were honored throughout their lives. They received plaudits, parades, and paintings. The bull's strength lay in its presence, not usually in its death. Additionally, Minoan ceremonies appeared to place a greater focus on harmony than the Roman arena, where bulls were killed for amusement, a courteous and perilous dance between man and beast. The goal was to touch something beyond, not to dominate. The bull did not represent anarchy. It served as a guardian of cosmic order. It took more than just courage to face a bull in Minoan Crete. It was a spiritual encounter, a temporary equilibrium between myth and flesh. One species reigned not by size but by mystery amid the thick jungles of Mesoamerica, behind the tangled canopy and resonant bird songs, the jaguar. This spotted predator was more than just an animal to the Maya, Olmec, and Aztec peoples. To them, it was a god in disguise, a shapeshifter, and a world traveler. The jaguar hunted at night, its eyes penetrating the darkness as it moved softly through the shadows. It was sacrosanct just for that. In a world where night stood for the unknown and the underworld, any creature that could easily navigate it was a king, a guide, or a messenger. Some people think that the enormous stone skulls sculpted by the Olmec, the oldest known Mesoamerican civilization, had feline traits. Fiery eyes, curled lips, and wide noses. They also depict were-jaguars in their artwork, who are hybrids of humans and jaguars and frequently have snarling jaws and fangs. Although its significance is still up for interpretation, it is clear that the Olmec were not just afraid of the jaguar, but also aspired to be one. This was furthered by the Maya, wearing pelts, helmets, and inscriptions that connected their power to the beast. Their kings frequently identified with jaguars. The jaguar was the beast that roamed freely through the dark and trial-filled underworld known as Xibalba. Some Maya deities, such as the formidable underworld jaguar deity, represented the dreadful yet essential duality of death and night. The Aztecs followed with their elite soldiers known as the Jaguar Knights. These warriors were chosen to channel the wrath of the jaguar. They were more than just soldiers. Clad in full jaguar pelts, complete with claws and snarling masks, they not only fought like jaguars, but also thought they were one. Battle was a ceremonial reenactment of cosmic battle, not only a matter of conquering. Even though it may sound grim to modern ears, sacrifice was essential. Jaguars were occasionally offered as sacrifices to the gods out of respect rather than cruelty. When a jaguar was killed, a sacred force was released, and when its heart was offered, the gods received something they knew to be kin. The jaguar was more than just a large feline to the Mesoamericans. It was a bridge connecting man and God, life and death, and day and night. Yes, a predator, but also a fur-clad priest. The elephant was more than just a magnificent beast in ancient Indian temples and forests. It was a living deity embodied in muscle and flesh. In terms of size and meaning, no creature was more imposing. Elephants represented strength, knowledge, memory, majesty, and the holy rhythm of the cosmos itself to the ancient Indians. They were incorporated into myth, not only worshipped. The elephant-headed god Ganesha is at the center of this awe. Ganesha is adored across Indian culture for his broken tusk, belly full of sweets, and perennially serene smile. Before getting married, traveling, or building a home, people pray to him because he is the deity who removes impediments and is the patron of fresh beginnings. However, he has a strong origin behind his mild exterior. In one version, the goddess Parvati created Ganesha to protect her solitude. Unaware that this was Parvati's husband, Ganesha prevented the god Shiva's attempt to enter her chamber. Shiva angrily severed the boy's head. Parvati's sadness shook heaven and earth when she learned what had happened. Shiva pledged to use the head of the first animal he discovered, an elephant, to restore the boy's life as a kind of restitution. Ganesha was reincarnated as a hybrid of an elephant and a human, yet he was always holy. Elephant worship, however, transcends myth. Real elephants were used as kingship symbols in ancient India. Armored, ornamented, and respected by those who rode and feared them, they were the thrones of battle. An army with elephants was fortunate in addition to being strong. Elephants were frequently housed in temples for ceremonial purposes. Sacred elephants with painted tusks and golden headdresses are still exhibited during yearly festivals in the southern state of Kerala. As they go by, devotees bow in respect rather than terror. Elephants are viewed as slow-moving gods that coexist with humans and are earthly manifestations of divine power. Elephants, particularly the cosmic elephant Airavata, the mount of Indra, monarch of the gods, are linked to fertility and rule in Vedic literature. According to legend, Airavata was created by the ocean, which was white as a cloud and had many heads, churning and trumpeting storms. Elephants were more than just animals in ancient India. They were thunder-made flesh, four-legged wisdom, and the silent power of eternity. Depending on where you were in the ancient world, the serpent could be your holy protector, or the mouth of chaos. To the majority of ancient peoples, the serpent was never just a snake. It was a sign of power, rebirth, danger, knowledge, and the divine. The serpent served both purposes in ancient Mesopotamia. The god of the underworld and plants, Ningishzida, is shown with snakes growing from his shoulders. He was a creature that hovered between the worlds of the living and the dead, serving as both a gatekeeper and a protector. The Sumerians did not despise serpents. Rather, they viewed them as intricate, risky, and, yes, essential. Snakes, also known as nagas, were considered to be celestial beings in Hinduism. They are semi-divine spirits connected to water, fertility, and cosmic equilibrium, not monsters or demons. One of the most famous pictures in Indian mythology is of Vishnu, the god of preservation, lounging on the coiling body of the infinite snake Shesha, who floats on the cosmic ocean. The Nagas resided in enormous jeweled palaces beneath rivers and lakes. Time itself, patient, coiled, and endless, was the serpent. It posed no threat. However, serpents weren't always kind. According to Hebrew mythology, the serpent in Eden was crafty and cursed, and it was inextricably linked to deceit and the fall of man. However, there is subtlety even here. In a rare instance where the snake becomes redemption rather than sin, Moses heals the Israelites who are afflicted by the plague by using a bronze serpent that is affixed to a pole in the Book of Numbers. The snake rose to divine heights in Mesoamerica. A hybrid of a snake and a bird, the feathered serpent god Quetzalcoatl stood for learning, wind, and creation itself. His dual nature, being rooted in the ground but having the ability to fly, was vital. It was slithering low but touching the sky, the ideal metaphor for heavenly intellect. Then there is the figure of the Ouroboros, the serpent devouring its own tail, which originated in Egypt and spread to Greece. It stood for eternity, the cyclical nature of life and death, devastation and resurrection. The serpent wasn't seen as bad by the ancients. It was everlasting, silent, cold-blooded, and the embodiment of mystery. Never quite god or beast, but always watching, always coming back. The crocodile, with its huge jaws and unblinking eyes, dominated the rivers of ancient Egypt, while cats lounged in temples and birds flew toward the heavens. Crocodiles posed a daily menace to the typical Nile villager. Before they attacked, they were silent and undetectable as they hid beneath the murky waters. Nevertheless, they were revered rather than despised. Yes, they are feared, but they are also revered, honored, and even shielded. The focal point of this uneasy adoration was the crocodile god Sobek, a figure who had a crocodile's head and a man's body. Sobek was no small swamp demon. He was a fertility deity, a creator, and a representation of the erratic might of the Nile. In addition, he guarded the troops and protected the king. In one narrative, Sobek assisted in Osiris's body restoration, transforming him from a terrifying god into a life restorer and healer. Water, strength, and the military were Sobek's domains. His bloodstream was Egypt's lifeline, the Nile. His eyes, messengers, and avatars were crocodiles. Like moving priests, they swam beneath the reeds. Sobek temples were constructed all around Egypt, particularly in areas with crocodiles. The most well-known was in Crocodilopolis, which is a true location in the Fayum oasis. The Egyptians called it Shedet. A live, sacred crocodile that was said to be Sobek's living manifestation was being cared after by the priests there. The finest portions of flesh were served to this wonderful beast, which was encrusted with gold and gems. It was treated like a king or queen as it lounged in a man-made lake. After it passed away, it was entombed, perfumed, wrapped with care, and mummified. Throughout Egypt, thousands of mummified crocodiles have been found. These animals are frequently interred with their young, acting as spiritual children. However, Sobek was more than just offerings and animals. He served as a reminder that power can be both beautiful and scary, and he symbolized the harsh side of nature. You could be drowned or given life by the Nile. Crocodiles may be devourers or gods. Worship was an acknowledgement of danger, not a defense against it. Because they saw a god's smile in its jaws, the ancient Egyptians honored the crocodile rather than attempting to tame it. No animals loomed greater in this harsh mythology than the wolf and the raven. In the frigid, shadow-draped world of the Norse, animals were not pets or companions. Rather, they were omens, warnings, fragments of prophecy, given teeth and wings. Let's begin with Odin, the All-Father, and his ravens, Hugin and Munin, who are always on guard. They were named for memory and thought. They flew over the planet every dawn, gathering signals and secrets. They sat on Odin's shoulders every night and whispered what they had witnessed. These were more than simply birds. They were manifestations of a god's intellect, the epitome of knowledge, gathering, and foresight. Ravens ate dead people on the battlefield. Their presence was considered hallowed by the Norse, not only gory. A raven circling overhead was reading fate, not just searching for carrion. Then the wolves arrived. The enormous wolf Fenrir was the apocalypse on 4 legs, not just another animal from the Norse bestiary. Fenrir, who was born of a giantess, and the cunning deity Loki, was destined to eat Odin himself at Ragnarok, the last time the gods were destroyed. The gods deceived Fenrir into being shackled by a magical chain because they were afraid of this fate. He snapped everything but one link, a silky thread made from impossibly difficult materials, the sound of a cat's footsteps, a mountain's roots, or a fish's breath. He screamed in rage and waited for the end of the world when they eventually chained him. However, wolves weren't always terrible. 2 wolves, Geri and Freki, attended Odin, and they ate everything off his meal. Apparently, all Odin needed was alcohol. Like the ravens, these wolves were an integral part of him, symbolizing the unadulterated primordial aspect of almighty strength, devotion, hunger, and instinct. The Norse saw these animals as live entities that were a part of the vast, frigid machinery of fate, rather than as symbols. They only needed to be honest. They didn't need to be adorable, devoted, or even submissive. In the North, animals served as messengers of war, prophecies, and the final sights one would see before glory or death, rather than as guides to peace or prosperity. The cow was more than just a domestic animal in ancient Vedic India. It was a sacred animal whose spirit was condensed into milk and muscle. Its significance in Vedic culture reveals how profoundly the ancients perceived divinity in the ordinary. One of the world's oldest sacred writings, the Rig Veda, describes cows as Agnya, which means they should not be destroyed. They were connected to Prithvi, the soil, and Aditi, the all-pervading mother goddess. The cow was viewed as part of nature, not something distinct from it. It walked among men like a living blessing, gave like the heavens, and nourished like the land. In addition to being sustenance, milk, butter, ghee, and curds were sacrifices made at yajnas, fire ceremonies in which the gods were nourished by fire. Pouring clarified butter into a fire was a cosmic alchemy that turned the cow's gift into divine energy, not just a show of devotion. Cows were associated with the mythological cow of plenty, Kamadhenu, who was able to fulfill any wish and provide for the entire universe. According to legend, Kamadhenu lived in the sages' hermitages and would emerge to bring abundance and harmony back when needed. She was revered but neither bred nor owned. India's indigenous humped cattle, known as zebu, were adorned with garlands and bells. Cows were adored, bathed, and painted during celebrations such as Gopashtami. They were even escorted into temples in certain communities to either bestow or receive blessings. The cows stood for tenderness, temperance, and sustenance, in contrast to the warlike status of bulls in Crete or the dreaded glory of jaguars in Mesoamerica. The cow was unaffected by the rise and fall of civilizations. It was spiritually untouchable, but politically neutral. Laws were treated with the same respect. Cow slaughter was discouraged and occasionally explicitly prohibited by ancient Indian legal systems, not for economic reasons, but rather because it was regarded as a transgression of the dharmic order. To injure a cow was to upset the cosmic equilibrium, and that respect still exists today, thousands of years later. It reverberates throughout fields, temples, and daily prayers muttered next to roadside shrines. The cow was the mother of creation in Vedic India, slowly eating grass while keeping the universe in its breath. It was also the backbone of the local economy. Birds were considered superior to other creatures in ancient cultures. They were revered for more than simply their ability to fly. They were thought to transcend worlds. Birds flew through the earth, sky, heaven, and underworld. This made them seem like natural divine messengers to primitive minds. Because of the god Thoth, who was the deity of intelligence, writing, and magic, ibises were revered in ancient Egypt. Thoth was frequently shown with the long-beaked, thoughtful, and poised head of an ibis. The god's measured intelligence was reflected in the bird's deliberate movements. The presence of ibises, which were associated with lunar cycles and the balance of truth itself, was considered auspicious, and they swarmed along the banks of the Nile. Not because they were useful, but because they were holy, thousands were mummified and buried in honor. The hawk, which represents Horus, the deity of kingship and the rising sun, then appeared. The hawk personified divine watchfulness with its sharp eyes and soaring wings. As living sons of Horus, pharaohs identified with this predatory bird. The hawk's acute vision also inspired the creation of the Eye of Horus, one of Egypt's most enduring protection emblems. The eagle, a creature too magnificent to belong only to earth, was associated with the gods of storm and war in Mesopotamia. Birds frequently serve as a link between the world of the gods and the mortal world, appearing in the Epic of Gilgamesh as warning or favor indicators. The Greeks held the eagle in the highest regard. Zeus, the king of the gods, revered this animal. In myth, Zeus would use an eagle to help him launch thunderbolts from the sky. The swiftness, brutality, and untouchability of the bird came to represent heavenly authority. In India, the enormous bird deity Garuda was the mount, Vahana, of the preservation-loving god Vishnu. Garuda, who was half human and half eagle, was not a pet. He was a serpent-eater, a cosmic warrior, and a guardian of Dharma. Temples, shields, and royal symbols were all decked with his likeness. Symbolism persisted even in societies without bird-shaped gods. Liberty, vision, and change. Birds moved with the seasons, disappeared into the clouds, and reappeared like prophets. Their flight was understood, their arrival observed. Birds were never simply birds to the ancients. They were the eyes of heaven, the wings of the gods, and moving souls. In addition to politics, Thomas Jefferson was an advocate of ideas. He saw himself as a thinker, an enlightened man rather than a king. He read Virgil, Locke, and Voltaire by candlelight, surrounded himself with books, and incorporated classical architecture into the construction of Monticello. His thoughts strayed far from the plantations of Virginia. "I can't live without books," he once said, and he meant it literally. When he penned the Declaration of Independence's "All men are created equal," it wasn't political theatre. Rather, it was a philosophical tenet that would endure for generations to come. Jefferson believed in liberty, reason, and self-governance. He envisioned a society in which free-thinking farmers tilled the land, rulers fell, and knowledge overcame superstition. However, the issue was never his vision. Rather, it was who was allowed to participate. Throughout his life, Jefferson held over 600 slaves despite his advocacy of liberty. He was aware that the system was flawed. In his writings, he condemned slavery as a moral abomination and a heinous stain. In some of his earlier works, he even advocated for gradual liberation. However, he hesitated when it came time to take action and free the residents and employees of Monticello. Some, like Sally Hemings, were kept in a considerably more personal and complex captivity, while the majority he never released, and some he sold. Jefferson believed that liberty should only be pursued by a select group of white, property-owning men. That was the real political world he envisioned. He benefited politically and monetarily by the highly unequal system of slavery, even as he envisioned the abolition of aristocracy. Historians continue to struggle with this dichotomy today. Was Jefferson a bright guy with blind spots big enough to engulf generations, a hypocrite, or a creature of his time? One thing is evident regardless of the response. Standing on the porch of a plantation, looking out over land cultivated by the very people his pen had forgotten, the man fought for humanity's natural rights. Even if his remarks sparked revolutions on several countries, that paradox would plague the rest of his legacy. Despite being a proponent of liberty, Jefferson led a life that was constrained by his own actions. Thomas Jefferson was an architect before he became president, and he designed ideas as well as structures. Jefferson intended to mold the United States with the accuracy of a draftsman using a compass over blank paper, since it was still an unfinished experiment. When Jefferson returned to Virginia after drafting the Declaration of Independence in 1776, he attempted to completely overhaul the state's legal system. He put out legislation to do away with ecclesiastical institutions that favored the Anglican Church and primogeniture, the law that only gave property to the eldest son. He supported leveling the playing field for white males to advance based on merit rather than ancestry, by tearing down hereditary privilege. He had to deal with the somber logistics of war in 1779 while serving as governor of Virginia. The British invaded. When the Redcoats showed up, Jefferson left his estate, a move that would subsequently be criticized as cowardice. He wasn't a warrior, though. He was a builder, a planner, and a thinker. Letters and legislation were his real battlegrounds. Jefferson soaked up the Enlightenment like a sponge on his 1780s ministerial trip to France. While criticizing the European nobility, he studied architecture, dined with thinkers, and marveled at European civilization. He brought cartons of literature, drawings of colonnades and domes, and a polished idea of the new republic back to America. Jefferson and Alexander Hamilton rapidly became at odds while Jefferson was Secretary of State under Washington. The country was becoming divided. Hamilton supported a powerful national government and business. Jefferson envisioned a republic with limited government authority and independent farmers. They disagreed on more than simply policy. They were conflicting blueprints for the essence of America. Jefferson was terrified of cities. He referred to them as political ulcers. He believed that the ideal citizen was rural, independent, well-educated, and surrounded by land, ideally inherited. But he painted this picture with the brush of hard work. His lifelong mistrust of centralized power was fueled by his mistrust of banking, industrialization, and elite entanglements. Jefferson himself, however, was never completely free from elites. He was one, rich, land-owning, and intensely political. He was the entire opposite of what he professed to resist. Nevertheless, during this early stage of his life, Jefferson established the framework for the American identity, a country where some people may live in freedom and equality, and a government created by intellectuals who thought that reason could be enshrined in the Constitution. However, the fissures were already visible. Thomas Jefferson referred to it as the Revolution of 1800 when he took the oath of office as president in 1801, ideological, nonviolent, and peaceful. A sitting president had given power to his political competitor following acrimonious party infighting, which is practically unheard of in the era of kings. The guy who detested pomp and circumstance, Jefferson, wore simple clothing to his inauguration. No powdered wig antics, no horse-drawn carriage, just an idealistic man with a smoldering ambition that is silent. He stated that a minimalist presidency was what he desired: reduced taxes, a smaller government, and a smaller military. Nevertheless, the United States itself would change during his tenure. Jefferson's most well-known presidential action was the Louisiana Purchase in 1803. He purchased a portion of land from Napoleon, that increased the young republic's size for $15 million. It had more than 800,000 square miles of untapped potential that extended from the Mississippi River to the Rocky Mountains. Undoubtedly, this was one of the most significant real estate transactions in history, yet it contradicted all of Jefferson's professed beliefs. The Constitution made no mention of the federal government's ability to acquire new territory. Jefferson was aware of this. He even thought about introducing a constitutional change to make it lawful, but he quickly abandoned the plan. Ultimately, he used his usual intellectual grace to defend the action. Orthodoxy has been subordinated to necessity. Once more, idealism yielded to opportunity. Jefferson envisioned a nation of yeoman farmers spanning vast landscapes, founded in independence and morality, and an empire of liberty. However, there were repercussions to expansion. There were difficult questions about the just purchased land. What about the existing Native American populations? Would slavery move westward? Could the federal government manage such a vast territory? In the hopes of discovering a waterway to the Pacific and cataloging its wonders, Jefferson sent Lewis and Clark to investigate the new frontier. However, his private correspondence exposed more profound aspirations, territorial claims, economic growth, and yes, a developing sense of national destiny. For someone who said he preferred to hide in his garden, Jefferson had a great deal of power as president and used it as he saw fit. Nearly overnight, he had transformed the republic into an empire, and the seeds he planted would alter all subsequent events. Standing as a testament to Enlightenment principles, symmetry, reason, and beauty, Monticello was situated atop a hill in Virginia. It was full of literature, inventions, and tributes to classical culture, and it was designed by Jefferson himself. However, there was a more sinister reality concealed underneath the architectural beauty. Slave labor was used to power Monticello, which was also a plantation. It housed and employed over 100 enslaved men, women, and children at any one time. They maintained the home that Jefferson referred to as his sanctuary, tended the fields, produced the bricks, and prepared the meals. Jefferson's way of life and Monticello would not have been possible without them. The conflict at the core of Jefferson's legacy is this one. The author, who believed that all men are created equal, treated people like property rather than only owning, controlling, selling, or punishing them. He listed each enslaved person at Monticello by name, age, and value in his meticulous records. Sometimes he called them assets. Jefferson openly condemned slavery as immoral and detrimental to both slaveholders and enslaved individuals. He called it a terrible stain and a moral rot. However, nearly none of the individuals he enslaved were set free. During his lifetime, moreover 600 came under his ownership, but less than 10 were released. There was some financial component to this. For the majority of his life, Jefferson owed a lot of money, and his slave labor served as collateral. A portion of it, however, was just inertia, the unwillingness or incapacity to overthrow the structure that provided him with comfort and prosperity. And Sally Hemings came next. There is now strong proof that Hemings, who was enslaved at Monticello, was the mother of at least 6 of Jefferson's children. In addition, she was his late wife's half-sister, the result of years of enslavement entwined with force, rape, and muddled bloodlines. One of the most repulsive and unsettling parts of Jefferson's existence is still his friendship with Hemings. She couldn't legally give her consent. Although Jefferson later emancipated them, some during his lifetime, some through his will, their children were born into bondage. Not all of Monticello was a house. It served as a mirror, reflecting the chilly compartmentalization, the rationalization, and the hypocrisy that let an idealistic man to live within an oppressive system. Jefferson, who was always a philosopher, was unable to resolve the paradox. He just accepted it. Thomas Jefferson had the spirit of a scientist hidden behind the politician and plantation owner. He didn't merely experiment with concepts. Instead, he examined, measured, and dissected them. Jefferson sought to record everything in the natural world that could be catalogued in his notebooks. He said that science was his passion, and he wasn't lying. He had books on meteorology, astronomy, agriculture, and anatomy in his library. Every day he observed the weather. He created mechanical devices, experimented with crops, and spoke with European scientists. He was not, in the conventional sense, a man of faith. He trusted observation, evidence, and what was observable and comprehensible, one of his obsessions for life. After studying fossils delivered to him from a cave in Virginia, the huge prehistoric sloth Megalonyx jeffersoni was named in his honor. He felt that America needed to demonstrate that its flora and fauna were on par with those of Europe, both politically and physiologically. The French naturalist Buffon even got into a bizarre scientific argument with him, arguing that American creatures were weaker and smaller than their European brethren. In response, Jefferson sent him enormous mastodon bones. I got the message. The American frontier also had a significant influence on Jefferson's interest in science. He sought data, not just maps, when he commissioned the Lewis and Clark expedition. Notes on indigenous peoples, topography, minerals, plants, and animals. He provided the explorers with thorough directions, keep a record of everything, bring samples back, open the door to the unknown. He saw the frontier as a laboratory where American knowledge would expand in tandem with its territory, rather than as a wilderness. Jefferson's interest, however, was interwoven with blind spots even in this. Policies that allowed Native Americans to be displaced coexisted with his affinity with their culture. In his books, he glorified their communities and advocated for land acquisition, which ultimately resulted in their eradication. Jefferson also used his innovative thinking to agriculture and architecture. He created his own plow design. He experimented with crop rotation. Monticello was a living experiment in many respects. Half scientific estate, half plantation. Jefferson did not consider knowledge to be a luxury. It was a virtue of citizenship. He felt that without educated people who were based on logic and investigation, a republic could not endure. However, his quest for the truth frequently came with unsettling paradoxes, much like a lot of other things in his life. It is not that Thomas Jefferson detested religion, he just didn't believe it. He believed that organized religion was harmful and that it was all too frequently used as an excuse for oppression, to stifle criticism, and to enslave people. He once wrote, "I have sworn eternal hostility against every form of tyranny over the mind of man upon the altar of God." He also very much includes creeds, clergy, and dogma in his definition of tyranny. Jefferson had a belief in God, but not the kind that meddles in day-to-day matters or commands the breaking of the seas. His beliefs were influenced by deism, the Enlightenment, and the idea that a creator created the laws of nature before letting the universe unfold naturally. Nothing but gravity, reason, and the plodding rotation of the planets. No miracles, no blazing bushes. Although he did not view Jesus as divine, he did admire him. Jefferson viewed him as a moral philosopher who preached humility, compassion, and peace, but years of church politics had warped his teaching. The Sermon on the Mount was revered by Jefferson. The resurrection was not something he had much time for. He practically created his own Bible because he was that devoted to this viewpoint. Jefferson went through the New Testament and physically removed all allusions to miracles, divinity, and supernatural occurrences using a razor and adhesive. All that was left was a small book of moral lessons, devoid of magic, but full of moral guidance. The Life and Morals of Jesus of Nazareth is the title he gave it. It was never intended for general use. It served as his own manual for what he thought Christianity should be. His detractors were appalled. He was frequently called godless, particularly in the acrimonious presidential contests of the early 19th century. Some even threatened to convert churches into stables and burn Bibles if Jefferson were elected. That didn't occur. However, the mistrust persisted. Jefferson vehemently defended religious freedom in spite of his doubt. He codified the idea of church-state separation as the author of the Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom. He only wanted 3 accomplishments to be mentioned on his gravestone. Faith was not the enemy to Jefferson. Faith was unquestioned. Jefferson prayed to reason itself, not to a god of thunder, amid the silence of Monticello, beneath the ticking of clocks and the scrape of quills. By the time he left public life, Thomas Jefferson was worn out, financially bankrupt, politically damaged, and more troubled by the paradoxes that had tarnished his reputation. In order to spend his last years in solitude, gardening, reading, and composing letters, he withdrew to his cherished hilltop home, Monticello. Jefferson's definition of anything but idle, however. He established the University of Virginia and personally planned the campus, including the lecture hall shapes and the neoclassical columns. He envisioned it as a secular temple of reason where students might pursue their studies without hindrance from the monarch or religion. Just research, no dogma, no religious tests. He referred to the university as his final act of service. It was, too. However, the most unexpected aspect of Jefferson's later years may have been the appearance of an old adversary, John Adams. In the past, the two had been friends, co-signers of the Declaration, and partners in the struggle for independence. However, politics eventually ripped them apart. Jefferson became the Democratic-Republican standard-bearer. The Federalists were led by Adams. Their animosity became acrid. They ceased writing. In the embers of election season, their friendship gradually perished. They were silent for more than 10 years. However, Dr. Benjamin Rush, a mutual acquaintance, urged them to get back together in 1812. Adams responded to Jefferson's tentative response, starting one of the most amazing letters in American history. They wrote over 150 letters to each other over the course of the following 14 years, mostly philosophical in nature rather than apologetic. They discussed memory, aging, science, politics, and theology. They discussed the Revolution as if they were 2 veteran soldiers comparing wounds. They were not always in agreement. Actually, they hardly ever did. However, they paid attention. Their correspondence served as evidence that rational discussion may endure despite the most severe differences. Jefferson's condition deteriorated. His debts increased. He started to sell off pieces of his land and library. A dream rather than a functional estate, Monticello gradually deteriorated around him. He did, however, regain something uncommon in those last years: tranquility. Once lost to politics, an old friend turned into a thought partner. Both had contributed to the creation of a country. They were now creating something more subdued as their lives came to an end, recognizing. Thomas Jefferson lay in bed at Monticello on the morning of July 4, 1826, too proud to moan and too feeble to get out of bed. He was 83, weak, heavily indebted, and fading in and out of awareness. His relatives had gathered around him in silence. The country he helped build was commemorating its 50th anniversary outside. Time and symbolism had always captivated Jefferson. History now appeared to be silently plotting. Jefferson's breathing slowed as parades gathered in Virginia and fireworks exploded in faraway towns. His thoughts drifted. He stirred a little and asked one last question, according to people at his bedside. "Is it the 4th?" He closed his eyes once more after being informed that it was. A few hours later, shortly after noon, he passed away. The tale doesn't stop there, though. Jefferson's longtime friend, adversary, and re-friend, John Adams, was also dying in Quincy, Massachusetts, hundreds of miles away. In addition to renewing their correspondence, the two guys had a peculiar and intense synchronicity. For almost 50 years they had been walking in parallel, constantly circling each other. Adams is said to have said his last words the same day, falling in and out of clarity. Thomas Jefferson makes it out alive. He was unaware that Jefferson had died only 5 hours prior. On July 4, 1826, two presidents, two founding fathers, and two signatories to the Declaration of Independence passed away. The nation they helped create celebrated its 50th anniversary. It was completely true, yet too poetic to be genuine. Like wildfire, word of the twin fatalities spread. There was amazement coupled with mourning. Newspapers presented it as divine providence, as though the founders had held off on letting go until they were certain the Republic had survived for 50 years. On his favorite peak, Jefferson was laid to rest beneath a simple obelisk that he had built himself. At his request, the president was left out of the inscription. Rather, it said, "Father of the University of Virginia, author of the Statute of Virginia for Religious Freedom, and author of the Declaration of American Independence." He desired to be known for his principles rather than his authority, and Jefferson was still a man of ideas, flawed, clever, paradoxical, and unforgettable, both in life and in death. More than just monuments, records, or lofty ideals were left by Thomas Jefferson. He left behind a controversy that has persisted for almost 200 years. He continues to be regarded by some as the greatest of the founding fathers, the architect of America's creation, and the president-philosopher who envisioned a free and just country. Others saw him as a hypocritical figure who advocated equality but nevertheless owned human people. Both points of view are accurate, yet neither one provides a complete picture. Jefferson was, both literally and figuratively, cast in marble for generations. Memorial walls were etched with his words. His sentences were memorized by school children. He was cited like scripture by political leaders. His face appeared on both Mount Rushmore and coins, making him a sort of secular prophet. Myths, however, fade with time. Historians and the general public have examined the previously overlooked aspects more closely in recent decades. It is now generally acknowledged that the relationship with Sally Hemings was one of uneven power, complicated by bondage and consent that could never genuinely exist, and the enslaved people at Monticello, as well as his lifelong refusal to release the majority of them. In order to pay off his obligations, Jefferson, who authored powerful statements for human rights, also sold individuals. Slavery spread throughout the American frontier, thanks in part to the man who envisioned an empire of liberty. To get rid of the sections of his own Bible that he didn't agree with, the thinker who supported religious freedom cut it up. He was possibly the first major contradiction in American history. Contradiction, however, does not imply lack of brilliance. It denotes intricacy. Jefferson was a man who used his words to change the world, but he was unable to completely change himself. He was a master of eloquent language who occasionally concealed harsh realities beneath it. He was forward-thinking in theory but cautious in practice. The story of Monticello is told in greater detail today. Both the house and the names of the enslaved laborers who constructed it have survived. Both Jefferson's successes and his failings are now included in school textbooks, and the nation he helped build is still struggling to reconcile the promises he made and the realities he experienced. There was never any true concealment of Jefferson's secret life. If one looked closely, it was always in plain sight. And maybe that's the lesson. A nation founded on principles must never stop challenging the men who penned them, not to eradicate them, but to fully comprehend and improve upon them.